We need to isolate these tiles in order to bring them into Photoshop. So I'm just going to bring them off of the artboard so it can be really clear what's happening. I'm going to do it all twice. So I have a piece here that had been kind of carved up with the divide tool, and I'm going to delete that guy. And I want this solid background piece, right? We need to put an artboard behind it, and it's very easy to do with the artboard tool. We can just grab the artboard tool and click on a rectangle, and it will make an artboard the size of that rectangle. So I'm literally just, with the artboard tool, going to click. And it makes an artboard behind it. See artboard 7. So same thing over here with this guy. I probably maybe have a piece that's carved up. I guess I don't. I guess I deleted it. But we just want the rectangle, and then with the artboard tool, I can just click on it, and it'll make an artboard that is exactly the right size. And if we compare the size of this rectangle, 3.5, 4 inches, to the size of that artboard, 3.5 and 4 inches. So very easy. Then we have to export this artboard, and we probably remember how to do that. File, export, export as, and we have to remember to choose use artboards or else it exports everything. And I just want artboard 7 and artboard 8. Actually, I'm just going to export 7 for right now because I like to save these as very particular. When I save them, I like to label them really clearly as tiles. This isn't something that you're going to print out, you know, for display. This is something, it's a utility that you're going to put into another program. So we can call this Halloween cat single tile. And I like to also include that it's a half drop there, because this one is Halloween cat, half drop, single tile, really clearly labeled. And I could save it as a PNG or a JPEG or a TIFF, but I'm going to hit export. And then on any of those, we want to make sure that the resolution is high, but also that anti-aliasing is off. Okay, aliasing, the word aliasing means how pictures get jaggedy, like when you're trying to make a curve out of pixels, it gets jaggedy. That's an aliased edge, a jagged edge. And anti-aliasing adds smoothing to edges so that they don't look jagged, but it also like adds pixels to your artwork that you don't want there. So no anti-aliasing, and we have to shut it off like at every turn. When we get into Photoshop, it's pretty crazy. But this is the first one. No anti-aliasing. None. Okay. Background color doesn't matter. If this were a completely white background, it would save it as transparent, but since it has color, it'll be filled. So we can hit OK, and then I'm going to do it for the other one too, artboard 8. So that one's a straight repeat, and I want to make that clear, and then single tile. Because you end up with so many files, it's like you're just saving, oh, see, I forgot to check use artboard, and it's trying to export all of the work that I've done. So I'm going to hit cancel. And unfortunately, I have to type that again. Use artboards. Saving is kind of the worst part of Illustrator sometimes. Again, high resolution and no anti-aliasing. We then are going to move over to Photoshop. But before you do, now that you have this tile, there are some websites that that use this tile in order to to make fabric and clothes. So just briefly, I want to bring you over to Spoonflower. And we can upload our own design. We can choose, let's do the broomstick. Yeah, we can choose the broomstick, and I own it, and choose upload, and it always takes a second. But on Spoonflower, you can order your own patterns on a lot of different types of fabric, and the quality comes out really good. There it goes. I order a lot of like sport lycra from them, so here it is. And if it were a half drop, we could tell it that, but it's just a straight repeat, so we can leave it there. And right now it's showing me what it would print out at as 21 by 18, a fat quarter size, right? But we can change it to yards, and that's what it would look at a full yard, and we could order more yardage, and it would show us all that. And there's a wide variety of fabrics, right? Spandex, everything. So that's fun. But you can use your tiles for that. Okay. We are going to move to Photoshop. And I'm going to open one of those up. I'm going to open up my straight repeat first. So this is just the straight repeat, like it's not repeating right now, but we can define it as a pattern. So if we choose Edit, Define Pattern in Photoshop, did it work? Yes, yeah, and I hit OK on that. Then if I go over to another page briefly, just to show you, we can go to Layer, New, Fill Layer, Pattern, and our pattern is now in this list of swatches. Some of these patterns I have defined, and some of them come with the program. And we can scale it here down a little bit. So we can get a layer that's filled with pattern in there. So the next thing we would want to do to get this onto a person is search for a white garment, or it doesn't even necessarily have to be white, but if it's a solid colored garment, I don't even know if that's, yes. We can grab a garment we like. We don't want black. We want something that shows the patterns very well. And white is often the best. Let me try. So I also want to filter for size, make sure it's nice and large. And I don't necessarily want, here, we'll do this guy. That has a lot of nice texture in it. So I am going to file new. All right, there she is. And this process breaks it down really easily, I think, if you follow the steps correctly, because we don't want to just like throw the pattern on top of this willy-nilly. We want to put part of the pattern here and then make it look like this is from a different cut of fabric. So we could put a different fabric there, a different cut of the fabric there. So we have to color block it all out. So with just as a review also of the types of selection tools, there is the Lasso Tool where you have to hold down the whole time that you're selecting, and I find that to be wearisome, so I mostly use the polygonal lasso tool and I click around. So that hides underneath the regular lasso tool. And I am going to click around this whole garment, and I'm trying to do it quickly. You could take more care than I. Remember, delete goes backwards on this tool compared to the pen tool where Control Z goes backwards. So I'm coming back to the beginning and I'm looking for this circle that appears next to the pen tool, right? And we can click on that and we have our shape. Now I'm going to make a new layer. This is key because we are going to fill these and we want to fill them with super clean edges, and we don't want to fill onto our original artwork because we're going to use this artwork later for its texture. So I'm going to choose some garish color that I'll remember to turn off, something like that. And whoa. So this is what would happen if I filled on the dress layer, right? Because the paint bucket tool acts a little bit like the magic wand tool in that it has tolerance, so it will only fill in layers that are like the same color when you click, or pixels that are the same color as where you click. It's giving you this effect and it's not filling evenly all the way to the edge. So we also want to, we want to be on this new layer. And there, it fills all the way to the edge beautifully. And the advantage of this is that with the magic wand tool, we can just click on this layer and we can choose that whole section again without having to click around with this shape. So we could easily, reselect it later and change it. So I would probably keep breaking down the rest of these shapes, and I'll just do it very quickly. I want to say also, I forgot to mention it the first time, but you got to make sure when you use any of the selection tools or the fill bucket, so make sure anti-alias is unchecked. We don't want it to smooth those jagged edges. And that's because we want the magic wand tool to be able to select all the way up to the edge without losing pixels, right? And if it adds that kind of gray edge that anti-aliasing adds, then sometimes it's hard to choose those pixels. So I'm going to simplify this and I'm just going to make it 2 parts, but if I were being, there's no coming back from that, gotta deselect. Notice I'm starting below this shape, and that's because the paint bucket, where it only fills up to, it only fills colors that are the same as where you click, right? It only fills, like if I click in an empty space, it's only going to fill that empty space, and it's not going to fill the pink space. So once I select this area, I can kind of exaggeratedly I can go down into the pink space. It doesn't matter, because when I use the fill bucket and I'm going to fill with another garish color, it's going to fill that whole section. As long as I am on the correct layer, it fills directly up to that line and not further. And as long as I've chosen anti-aliasing the whole time, there won't be like a little gray line between these colors, which does happen if we've chosen anti-aliasing sometimes. So I have those 2 layers blocked out. If I were being more anal, I would do another color block for this under section, and I would have done color blocks for her more detailed layers on the bust. I'm going to rename this layer by double clicking on the name, and I'm going to name it color block so I remember to shut it off. Now, where does our pattern come into this? So far we've made her dress look really bad. So I'm going to grab the magic wand tool and select part of the dress now. And we are going to go to Layer, New Fill Layer, Pattern. And I can choose this witchy shape, this witchy pattern and this broomstick pattern, and I can change the scale, and I can click in there and change the scale with my mouse bar. Hit OK, and this doesn't look like anything yet, but if we shut off the color block layer, this is key, guys. We're going to shut off that color block layer, and on our fill layer, our layer with the pattern, we're going to change the opacity to, let's try multiply, and see it brings in a lot of that volume and that texture. And it's nice to play with these opacity because sometimes hard light is more appropriate. Depending on the color, these choices are going to be different, like depending on if you're using a dark or light color in there. Difference is never right. But we'll stick with multiply, and we'll even lower the opacity a little bit. So not only are we letting some of those darks show through, we're making it a little bit see-through so we can see some of that texture. All right, I'll do it again with, turn this color block layer back on. I'm gonna grab, I have to have the color block layer selected, but when I click on this, I grab it instantly, and I don't have to pick around it. And then we can go to Layer, New Fill Layer, Pattern. And our pattern is in here because we defined it earlier, right? It's not just magically in here. So we can try to, we would maybe should have taken note of the size we ended up on at that, but notice they look like they're from two different cuts of fabric. And then I can change, let me shut off my color block layer, and I can change that opacity to multiply, and see I have a lot of that texture under there. You can see why I would have wanted to break this up into different sections, right? Because it looks right now like someone kind of spray painted this on top of a ruched dress, and I could have probably made it look a little better. Oh, like my dress from earlier, which I guess I closed. Okay. Oh, there she is. Where I split, right, this was my color block layer, and I split her into these two sections of fabric. So we are going to do that for our in-class activity after the crit. I'm sorry. Okay, let me open up the half drop because it's a little bit different for the half drop. Oops.
Couldn't you do this all in Illustrator too?
Yes, you could, because Illustrator has the same opacity settings. They just live in a different spot. You could probably do a lot of this in Illustrator. We have the advantage of, we could soften the edges in here, but actually you can do that in Illustrator. It's just traditionally we do this kind of thing in Photoshop because it's editing photos. I want to open this one that I exported. And right now, if we defined this, right, if we went to edit, define pattern, and we went back to our dress, we can easily change the pattern on this dress to our newly defined pattern by double clicking on this shape. So that is like the pattern picker, and then this is the I'm sorry, I'm blanking on the name of it, layer mask, and we'll talk about the layer mask briefly, but we can double click on that, and then over here we could choose the new one and get that there. But it's not going to look right because it is a half drop. So it is cut off in the middle. Photoshop likes for these things to be straight repeats. And in order to transform a half drop into a straight repeat, which is something that we end up doing occasionally anyway, we're just going to go over kind of the math of it really quick. So I am going to make just a new page super quick. So if this is our half drop, weird color, we are going to grab a rectangle, something like that, and we will say that this rectangle has a width of X and a height of Y. I'm going to duplicate these. If we wanted this rectangle to, oops, I made it difficult on myself. There we go. So we want to line it up like that. Then the whole shape that we actually end up making in order to turn this half drop shape into a straight repeat is this big. So Y is still the same, but there's 2x in the width. So same thing if it were a straight repeat, right? Or sorry, a brick. If we had a rectangle and its height is still X and Y. Except it gets, is this thing a rectangle? These get dropped down like this, though. Right, let me grab all of these. Then, to make this into a straight repeat, we would have to make a rectangle that goes like this. I hope this makes any sort of sense. And then this would be 2y. Okay, so in order to turn this half drop into a straight repeat, we need to double its width. We can do that in image canvas size and 3.503, so 7. And it expands on both sides. We have to move this one side over. And then I'm going to duplicate this twice. Duplicate layer. Duplicate layer. And we just line them up like so. This happened last time too. To the You guys know how it is trying to get rid of these lines. I'm worried that maybe I didn't save it with anti-aliasing on. Off, I mean. No, they're solid pixels. All right, edit, define pattern, just like last time. But now you can see that like where this one goes off of the edge, it comes on straight across, even though it will still representationally look like a half drop. So I can move back to this lady, double click right here on, or double clicking on the pattern, and we can choose the new one. And there it is. So we addressed what this one does. It controls a little bit of, it controls which patterns we're choosing, and also we could adjust the scale of the pattern on the garment there. But I think it was 11. What does this one do, right? Because this layer is made up of these two little thumbnails and they're linked together. So the one on the right is our layer mask, right? And these masking layers, with these masking layers, we can see where we have selected. So this lighter area is what is selected by that masking layer, and we can actually change how it shows this to us if we want to over here in properties. And we can also over here on the left, we could choose to affect this layer slightly. So there's some white still showing at the top of her dress there. It's subtle, right? And I can, and this already has the little plus sign next to it, so I don't even have to hold shift to use this, but I can adjust that along there. And as long as I come back to the beginning, it adds that to the layer mask. It's just a subtlety of it. So you can come back in and finesse it even after you have started. Okay. So seeing that white spot is gone there. What if we wanted to change colors in Photoshop? And there might be reason to do this. I have some stuff that I designed a long time ago where I've lost the Illustrator file, but I still have like the tile or the JPEG or something. I still have parts of it, and I could edit it, edit the tile in Photoshop to change the color instead of editing the original in Illustrator. I'm actually going to merge all these layers onto one layer, and it'll function a little bit better that way. So I'm going to go up here and choose Merge Layers. And because I have reduced this to a certain amount of colors, when I use the Magic Wand tool on it, I can change the tolerance to 0 and still know that when I click the black, it's picking up every single piece of every single time I use black in this illustration. And you can see I didn't do the best job of reducing it to all of its colors. But so I could choose to retouch this with a new colorway by using the Paint Bucket tool. And the Paint Bucket tool, it normally hides under the Gradient tool. So if you haven't used it, it'll be hiding under the Gradient tool. And I can click into one of my selections and start subtly changing things, or less subtly. Switch back to my Paint Bucket tool. Right, so because we exported with no anti-aliasing and everything, we know that it's going to check, it's going to get all of the pixels of each of these colors directly. Okay. What if we wanted to reduce colors in Photoshop? And it's not quite as straightforward as it is in Illustrator. There's no easy auto trace color reduction like in Illustrator. But let's say I wanted to take a piece from this again and make it into a pattern, or reduce the number of colors that it has. And I can do it very precisely in Photoshop, actually. I have more control over it, so it is an option. So let me grab, I'll grab all of them. And I'm going to do Command-C. And when I go to File New, it's going to make a clipboard file that is exactly the right size. So when I hit Command-V, there they are. The first thing I'm going to do is remove the white background. So with the Magic Wand tool, if I click right now, I'm just going to get sort of this like sparkly effect because it's only choosing every pixel that's exactly that color white. So I have to raise the tolerance to probably like, I don't know, 50. And that'll get all of the white that's in there. And I can actually just hit delete right away. And I can start using the Magic Wand tool at a fairly high tolerance, especially when the colors are different enough from each other. Like clicking with the black, clicking on the black is probably not going to pick up the green, where if I were working with tones of green, it might be a little bit harder. But I can click on them and see here, it's maybe not picking up as much of the black as I want, right? There's some holes in it. What I can do is hold Shift and get that plus sign next to the Magic Wand tool and click there, and I'll get a little bit more going on, maybe over there. So every time you hold Shift and click, you're going to be picking up more and more black. So that looks pretty good. And on a new layer, right, because I want this fill layer to go all the way up to the edge and not have to fight with filling in against the background, with this new fill layer, on this new layer, I'm going to fill it with a color. And if I hold Alt while I'm in the paint bucket tool, I get a little eyedropper tool, and that will pick up a color from your painting. So I'll choose that really dark black, and I'll just hit fill. So now if I shut off my original layer, you can see how black and crisp that is. Same thing, we can do it with the green. Select around that. I can hold shift and click again, but it looks like it's done a pretty good job. And I can fill in with a green color, and I can hold Alt while I'm on the paint bucket tool and pick with that green color. Oops. So, sorry, I deselected instead of Control Z or something. Something like that. Layer 2. Oh. I have to be on the right layer while I'm selecting. Yeah. Oh. Does that mean I close this? I feel like. No?
Apparently there's a shooter at Simmons. That's the text that I just got.
Really?
I'm so sorry.
Yeah, I just like the email text.
Yeah, we
I
was like, what? They only text us in groups when it's like really bad.
Oh, should I keep lecturing?
Yeah.
Okay. I was cool. It's not here. You're right.
Simmons is like close to us.
It's
Like
yeah,
every
next
next
door.
It's like next door.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh boy.
So I guess I actually do have more than one option here, which I'll break down in a second. But let me step backwards because I've accidentally filled this with green. Okay. So if I'm on this layer, I can start grabbing the green from here, and I can fill it. But what I was gonna say is that my other option there, like for this shape, the color, or I filled on the wrong layer, classic. I want to make sure I fill on layer 2 so that it goes all the way up to the edge. But this color, it goes all the way up to the black edge, right? So I can just choose that color. And then on layer 2, I could, with the fill bucket, just click in there. And as long as contiguous is checked, it will fill all the way up to the edge. So that's an option, and then you could click into each of those spots, but I'm going to keep trying it with the magic wand tool and try to automatically pick up every dot of it, even though that's the wrong layer again. Switching, clearly labeling your layers as they get closer and closer together is important, right? Because it gets harder and harder to tell on these tiny thumbnails which is which. So that's good, and we'll fill it on the fill layer. Okay, and let's uncheck contiguous now so it fills in all of them. Same thing on the red. I could select the red on the original layer, and the red has a lot of nice like movement to it, so I wouldn't want to use the fill bucket and just fill up to the edge of these anyway. Switch back to my fill layer and click in there after choosing the right red color from the ruby. All right, and then I think I'm actually going to leave these guys blank, right? So when I shut off the original, those are supposed to look like gleaming moments on there, the white spots, so I'll leave them. It might be that I would want to go in and clean this up a lot. Okay, so I might want to take the pencil tool, grab this red color, right? We can use the Alt command to get the eyedropper when we're using the pencil tool and kind of fill in some of this graininess. Or it might have been that I should have taken more time while selecting, right? Because I can, after I've used the magic wand tool, I can go in with my lasso tool and kind of finesse this, right? So I can hold shift and add to the selection. Say I know I want it to go further up the edge here. Hold shift and I get that plus, and then I can release shift. So then when I fill this, I see I didn't hold shift and it started over, but I can just hit escape and it won't have lost everything. So I can grab some of these dots that maybe it missed. So maybe I do that before I fill or after I fill. But we did reduce it to only 4 colors here. And we could take this and make a neat little pattern out of it in Photoshop. So let's just really briefly go over if we were going to make a pattern in Photoshop, which is possible, but it's not as straightforward as it is in Illustrator. So I'm going to move these into some kind of a more of a composition, right? So I'm selecting them, and even though they're on the same layer, if I select around them and then grab with the move tool, I can move them even though they're on the same layer. I can move them separately. So we'll kind of move these closer together. Remember, Command T is for transform, and we can even rotate and scale them separately, right? So I am going to hit enter and deselect. Now, right now, if we went to edit define pattern and we defined this, we would have big holes in our corners, right? We would have big gaps in it where it repeated. We can even do it really quick. Edit define pattern. Switch back to this lady. Right, so we don't have nice flow in this, and we have big obvious holes. So what we can do to fill those holes, and maybe we would even, I don't know, maybe we would have a few more motifs, or maybe we would have made a few more of these. I don't know. Okay, even if we defined this one, which has a little bit more going on, we would still have holes in it. So we are going to merge all these onto one layer. So I'm selecting all of them. I could even choose merge visible right now because there's nothing that I don't want to merge there, or flatten image would also do it. Put them all onto one layer. Merge layers though. And we're going to use this filter in Photoshop, and it lives under Filter Other, and it's called Offset. And the key to this is that it wraps around. So before we do this though, we want to make quick note of the size of our image. Inches, pixels, we want it in pixels. So it's 707 by 516. I'm just gonna make these easier numbers. Hopefully that doesn't destroy too much. Yeah. So they were 700 and 500. And we can go to filter other offset, and we want to put the halves of those numbers in here. So it's going to move horizontal half of its width, so 350, and it's going to move vertical half of its height, so 150, right? Was it that? Yeah, 700 by 300 or 700 by 500? Darn it, I'm the worst. Let's look at what 250 looks like. That looks better. And this is like the gap that we would get, that we could fill in these spaces in between our tile, right? So we could put another jewel here, right? We could even, because this jewel is so simplified right now, it only has 2 colors, we can grab the the paint bucket tool and fill it with green, right? We could turn it into a ruby, or we could turn it into a gold ruby. So we would probably want to have grabbed other motifs, but I guess I'll just fill it with rubies of various colors to kind of fill in these holes. Then we can either do filter other offset again, or we can just define this as a pattern, right? So it's already a straight repeat, because we can see this guy goes off and it comes back on over there, as do these guys. Do one more golden one on the right layer. And the one thing we really don't want to do when we're filling this in is we don't want to touch the edge, right? Because if we did this, then we would have broken our seamless repeats. It would have a seam there along it because it's not rolling over to the other side. So we have to leave it on there, which is part of what's harder about it. Like, there's no way to clip things to the edges of squares like we do. Okay. And then edit, define pattern. We can just define it right away, or we could merge them all. Merge layers and go to filter offset again. So this is kind of our original composition, and now you can see that the edges are filled in with these rubies. Okay. Edit define pattern. I guess we've defined it twice, but they're the same. And now over here we can see our superior pattern. There. It's a little bit gritty, but I tried to explain to the other class how to make half drops and bricks in Photoshop, and I totally failed too. So that's much easier to do in Illustrator. I think we did get there, but it was not the easiest process. Illustrator is much superior for making these patterns, even with the problems that it has. Okay. I think that is that for now.